The Introduction and Overview, Part 7. As you are contemplating cataloging, try looking for things by a creator named PDQ Bach and compare your results when you search by Bach, PDQ as an author and PDQ Bach as a keyword. Then, think about how the data in the catalog record was intended to meet those objectives, tasks, and principles listed previously, and whether or not the data, or the system, was successful in doing that. We'll talk more later about how this should work, whether it does or not, and why. Now that I've covered a lot of the basics, let's look at the theory of description and how it relates to traditional library cataloging. The purpose of descriptive cataloging is to create a description of a resource using basic bibliographic information to uniquely identify it. Descriptive cataloging is guided by a set of rules or guidelines that identifies data in a standardized way. This will be part of the focus in the next module, but here is a very brief overview. Ferber defines the main entities that may be described in a library catalog and determines which characteristics are definable for each entity. Those characteristics are referred to as attributes. Ferber also defines the type of relationships that entities can have with each other. By examining and describing these entities, attributes, and relationships, the user, in theory at least, will be able to tell what it is, who made it, and what it's about, and also whether they need it, that whole FISO thing. All of the principles and theories are great and well-intentioned, but how does it all work in practice? We will use part of the International Standard Bibliographic Description, known colloquially as ISBD, in practice this semester. It is a set of guidelines maintained by IFLA that include the standard way of writing data elements and adding punctuation to ensure it makes sense. Here is an example of those elements with their punctuation according to ISBD. Though we use the guidelines of RDA to determine the way we write the descriptive data, it does not tell us when to use punctuation or what punctuation to use, so we continue to apply the ISBD punctuation with it. This practice has gotten even more complicated lately, and we will talk about that in a couple of weeks. We will deep dive into this more starting next week, but RDA is the current set of guidelines in use in the United States, which tells catalogers how to describe resources and where to put the parts of the description. The description of object characteristics is held and arranged in a software framework called MARC, which is an acronym for Machine Readable Cataloging. MARC seems like an unusual or even nonsensical thing, but the same could be said for any programming language, taxonomy, or framework. MARC is set up like any markup language for a database. The data is contained in boxes that have numeric tags. Within those boxes are smaller boxes with alphanumeric tags. When we place data inside one of those boxes, MARC knows what kind of data it is and how to show it to the user. I've mentioned authority already, but I haven't yet explained what it is or why it's important, and we will go further into authority later in the semester. In a nutshell, it allows us to collocate similar things based on common data. This is the very core definition of collocation, and essentially the core purpose of cataloging. To collocate like or related objects in an efficient and logical manner, catalogers work to create data records that bring those together. Those data records are called authority records. If you've ever used a card catalog, you probably know the advantages of our online catalogs. You can search by keyword throughout catalog records. However, there are some areas left out. For example, if you're looking specifically for an audio disc, you can't type audio disc in the search bar of WorldCat because it hasn't made the physical description we put in a MARC box searchable. Another advantage is that you can also sit at home in your underwear and find out if the library has something you need before even bothering to put on pants. But have you noticed that you can't always just browse through whatever? That there is very little ability to accidentally come across something you didn't even know you needed? That you often have a hard time finding what you know must be there, but you can't remember exactly what the thing was called? That's because an online library system, at this point, can only provide exacting information and does not have the ability to think critically on its own. But your brain can do so much more. It can see partial information and automatically complete it. It can see almost sorta kinda information and draw the correct conclusions. It can jump into an alphabetical list of words and find the ones that just might help, even though they aren't exactly the word you were looking for. In the short time that I have been in libraries, I have already seen many of the functions that almost replicated those abilities go away because system developers didn't want to bother. Then comes arranging objects in a logical manner so that you can find one where it is supposed to be, tucked among things like it. That's where classification comes into play. Classification essentially assigns a street address to every object so that it can be found somewhere. It makes the address pretty unique so that library users don't get lost, and they can tell that this house is not that house. If you have used a library, you are probably a little familiar with the Dewey Decimal Classification, or the Library of Congress classification systems, as they are the most widespread in the U.S. These are prime examples of structured classification systems, designed to physically locate similar things near each other, facilitating physical browsing. There are structured systems for specific content, like the Superintendent of Documents Classification System, known as SUDOCS, used specifically for U.S. governmental content and assigned by the Superintendent of Documents in the Government Publishing Office. There are also many localized systems or grassroots systems developed to handle materials that are non-standard or that do not fit cleanly into another system. This is pretty common in things like sound recordings, since so many of them are compilations of more than one kind of music or more than one musical instrument combination. So it is hard to squeeze them into something like LC, which is designed for each item to represent one work. And for some collections that are not accessible to the public, meaning a library staff member must retrieve an item that a user would like to borrow from behind the circulation desk, there may be no need for a structured system that promotes browsing, since no one is ever allowed access to the shelves to browse. So items are added to the end of a shelf as they are received and assigned a simple number or alphanumeric identifier. An ILS brings together various modules of activity that are interrelated. This is a list of some possible modules you may encounter in an ILS, though it is not necessarily everything, and these are not necessarily in every system. In general, they do about the same things from system to system, but the exact procedures, like where to click, differ. The Acquisitions module handles the tasks related to ordering materials and then bringing them into the system when they arrive. It also maintains all of the fund structures that pay for various resources. The Cataloging module manages all of the various descriptive and structural data records. The Circulation module deals with checking items in and out of the library, charging bills and fines for users with overdue materials, and managing user accounts. The Reserves module allows staff to create and manipulate temporary levels of access to items on reserve for a class. The Reporting module makes it possible to query the underlying database in more robust ways than the Cataloging module for big data manipulation. It also allows functionality for things like sending overdue notices to users or listing new materials. The Administration module also allows system owners to control the access and various levels of permission for users of the ILS, making sure it isn't possible to make irreparable changes to areas of the database that are under someone else's purview. Interlibrary Loan, or ILL, connects the library's objects with users at remote institutions and keeps track of incoming objects from other libraries. The OPAC maintains the web display and functionality of the catalog that the user sees. The acronym OPAC, which as a reminder stands for Online Public Access Catalog, goes back to the days where there was one machine dedicated to giving library users access to search the library catalog, when the internet was fairly new, but the World Wide Web didn't yet exist. Each module is connected to the others through underlying database tables. For example, when a user checks out an item, the barcode number is scanned in the circulation module, which communicates with the cataloging module to temporarily change the current status of the item to checked out. Then, when the OPAC queries the database, the current status listed in the cataloging module is displayed to the user of the OPAC. At the same time, the ID of the user is scanned, and their account information is queried from the user database. If they are allowed to check out that type of item for 3 weeks, it will mark that item as being under their care for 3 weeks. Then when the reporting module is tasked with sending overdue notices, the reporter will query the circulation database to see that the item is overdue and will put the descriptive information about the item from the cataloging module to tell the user which item is overdue.